if he did cheat, he's a damn good man from hiding it from all of you.
So if you're a high enough status individual, then you get to get away with more.
You guys need to put women's feet to the fire.
Don't consider monogamy until you're 30.
Ask everyone to rate their looks on a scale of 1 to 10. Okay, we'll start with you. Go ahead.
And there's now more confusion than ever over what it is to be a man and the role of a man.
It was the decade of the 1980s. The Cold War was coming to an end. Nintendo released the NES, and I hadn't been born yet. More relevant though, a psychology professor by the name of Shepard Bliss coined the term we've become all too familiar with today:
toxic masculinity.
Toxic masculinity.
Toxic masculinity, for example.
Toxic masculinity.
Toxic masculinity.
Toxic masculinity.
Toxic masculinity. These people have nowhere else to go.
Bang. They're expunged.
Andrew, can you tell us about toxic masculinity and what it is in your eyes? Does it exist? Is it a farce?
We'll go on to define toxic masculinity later, but for now, suffice it to say, it essentially means male typical behaviour society deems bad. So, in the spirit of fairness, shouldn't there be an opposite, a counterpart term meaning male typical behaviour society deems good? Well, there is, but despite it coincidentally being introduced by that same professor, for some reason we never hear anything about it. He called it Mythopoetic Masculinity, which admittedly doesn't quite roll off the tongue. Sometimes referred to as Jungian Masculinity, inspired by the philosopher and psychoanalyst Carl Jung. Now, this term wasn't just a term, it was a movement inspired by the likes of Robert Bly, James Hillman and Joseph Campbell. The mythopoetic movement encouraged men to pursue personal growth, reclaim their spirituality and develop a more mature, deep masculinity. Unfortunately for its admirers, the mythopoetic movement was relatively short-lived, fading into obscurity before the turn of the century. And since it was the only movement of its kind, its disappearance left men directionless once again on all notions of manhood and masculinity. That is, of course, until today. If you, yes you can do this right now, open up an incognito tab, place your cursor in the YouTube search bar and type in the words how to be a. Some of the top suggestions include how to be a man, how to be a sigma male, and how to be a sigma. And if you add an N, changing that a to an an, I'm a big fan of correct grammar, one of the top search suggestions becomes how to be an alpha male. This revelation becomes interesting for a myriad of reasons, primarily because if you consider the likes of YouTube, TikTok, the internet as a whole to be a repository for the collective unconscious, then popular searches illuminate to us what we as a culture, society, and ecosystem think we need. So, why are modern men in need of advice for something they already are?
When do you become a man?
For what is a man?
Masculinity, what it means to be a man.
You know, what does it mean to be a man?
This person is talking about masculinity. This person is talking about what it means to be a man.
Age 13, you're supposed to be a man, in my opinion.
That they were struggling with their manhood and that you give them this message that it's okay to be a man.
And then there's also people telling us that being a man means that you're shit, right? That you're toxic, that you're evil, that you're privileged.
It's not a good time to be a man right now. It's very confusing.
What are men good for? Nothing.
Men are seen as something kind of ugly in our culture.
Do you think men are important in society?
Well,
Do you think men are important? Like for what?
For reasons we'll come to explore, men in the 21st century face a void where their sense of meaning and purpose used to be, leaving a combination of sigma male grind set edits, alpha male destroys feminist clips, and controversial Manosphere podcasts to monopolize the conversation.
Shutting the fuck up is a huge skill set for a lot of modern day women.
Sleep with as many hoes as you want and then go home and hold your wife or have sex with your wife.
I have to fuck her so she obeys me.
I don't want to sound like an asshole, but a woman's ejaculation is irrelevant.
Women have it on easy mode.
Men must become and women just are.
Once women get past 28, 29, it just declines rapidly.
What we're saying is all women are fucking gold diggers.
I had these guys selling their houses, life savings, loans, all of it to me. Give me it all. So like, and it's basic shit, right? You'd have a guy.
You feel bad or no?
Fuck no. To give a solitary fuck.
As it appears to me, there is a large contingent of modern men that currently feel lost, which is why I, silly-haired internet man, have appeared to tell you it's not necessarily your fault. I have the antidote right here, and there isn't one kind of masculinity, there's four. Hello and welcome back to the Laytonicals channel. It is I, the Layton in question, and today we will be combining my academic background and my background of being terminally online to determine what is masculinity, where does it come from, and what version of it is being pushed by the Manosphere. My trusty companion, my light in the darkness, is going to be this book, and so we'll be bouncing between the advice and descriptions found in the book that I have just shown you, as well as some of the advice and descriptions that are being pushed by the Manosphere. But suffice it to say, this book is the kind that I wish that I would have read 10 years ago. The biggest takeaways for me is that there are multiple ways of embodying what we refer to as masculinity. So the kind that we naturally are attracted to or find ourselves exhibiting varies from person to person. So in some ways, this video is going to act as a kind of quasi-personality test that you can apply to yourself, that you can apply to other people, whether you're a man or woman. Despite the fact that we're talking about masculinity, we all contain these kinds of traits, and so embody these kinds of traits in different ways. And what's interesting is that despite this book coming out in 1992, it actually goes on to predict, in a way, the kind of Sigma alpha male phenomenon. It talks about other kinds of men too, which is good, because I've heard it said that many men kind of find themselves unable to participate in the conversation around manhood and masculinity and things. So it's we got an eclectic bunch of stuff to talk about. We're going to explore some good, we're going to explore some bad, it's going to get a bit esoteric, it's going to get a bit metaphysical, it's going to get a bit psychological, and at times it's also going to get a little bit dark. If you're excited, drop a like, get your comment fingers ready, and now let us prepare to explore the 4 types of masculinity, its hazards, and how the Manosphere is influencing the conversation together. So a lot of people have a different range of responses to the idea of masculinity nowadays. You know, some people on the more woo-woo side start thinking about, you know, masculine and feminine polarities and things of that nature. And then on the other side, when they hear masculinity, it almost conjures up this kind of primal instincts. They start hearing this song reverberating in the inside their noggin, and it also summons up these images of fictional characters like Patrick Bateman and Thomas Shelby and Andrew Tate.
Did the AK go Rambo, take out all of fucking Pakistan like a G. I don't play games.
Wherever you fall on that spectrum of definition, this video will cater to you later, because we are going to be defining masculinity later, which is a little bit unorthodox. You know, videos like these, generally speaking, they start off with the definitions, let's say, but I'm saving it for later for a particular reason. It's a bit high concept, it's a bit psychological, and so until the time comes, I would merely ask you, dear viewer, to postpone your connotations of masculinity until then, whether they're good, whether they're bad, whether there's something else. For now, the most important thing to start off with is the premise that masculinity, whatever it is, isn't necessarily bad, and in some ways may actually be good. So, holding the view that masculinity negatively impacts one's behaviour is associated with lower mental well-being, according to a new study of more than 4,000 men. The findings shed light on the relationship between societal perceptions of masculinity and individual mental health, challenging previous notions that masculine attitudes are inherently harmful or detrimental. Further, in recent decades, it has become increasingly popular to attribute men's health problems and relative lack of help-seeking behaviour to deficits in masculinity. Despite the popularity of this explanation, the evidence base for this notion is weak, and improvements to men's health based on this deficit view of masculinity have not been apparent. Summarising in reverse order, ascribing masculinity as being the reason for men's poor mental health is not accurate, and actually, men that have a negative perception of masculinity compared to those that have a positive idea of masculinity actually have worse mental health overall. And those things in tandem may actually be quite surprising to some of you watching, because as one of the studies mentioned, it's actually become quite popular to say that masculinity is bad. And what I just shared with you also flies in the face of what the APA shared a few years ago, which was pretty controversial, this idea that, quote, traditional masculinity is psychologically harmful. Actually, the absence of it seems to be psychologically harmful. Maybe you can make a case that some aspects of masculinity can become harmful, which I'll get to later. Surely there are redemptive qualities about masculinity as well that are, you know, beneficial to men, women, children, society as a whole, which is why the opposite of toxic masculinity is heroic masculinity. It's all around us. You depend on it for your safety, as I do. It is almost entirely taken for granted, even reviled, until trouble comes, and it is ungratefully demanded by the very people who usually decry it.
So he enters the movie theater and he starts unloading rounds just kind of at will. and 3 men, 24, 26, and 27, threw themselves on top of their girlfriends to use their bodies as shields. All 3 men died. All 3 women survived.
Now that we've established that masculinity holds positive qualities, you may be dismayed to find out that actually masculinity is on the decline. And so we better make like Socrates and ask ourselves, why? Some people cite the fall of testosterone that's happening year on year. The food is poisoned. There's BPA water bottles. They're putting chemicals in the water to turn the frickin' frogs gay. But those are more biological explanations, and I think that there's something happening that's more cultural, let's say. And so, baby boy, I have a quote to share with you. Tradition is a set of solutions for which we have forgotten the problems. Throw away the solution and you get the problem back. And so, the problem that many men are developing is the identity of the Puer Aeturnus, Latin for eternal child, used in mythology to designate a child god who is forever young. Psychologically, it refers to an older man whose emotional life has remained at an adolescent level. It's essentially a man-child, a basement dweller. Man has spent the past 20 years of his life playing Minecraft for 16 hours a day and then playing Minecraft again in his dreams, bro. Bly and Hillman note that many men today act out of the Puer Aeturnus, eternal youth archetype. The Puer lives a provisional life, often with a great deal of creativity, but he tends to lack discipline, commitment, groundedness, and the ability to persevere. They're essentially talking about a bitch-ass nigga. Interestingly, they say men today, which suggests that this hasn't always been the case. It's as though something socially, environmentally is happening to make this more and more prevalent. And of course, there's going to be some things that are downstream of like economic things happening. So, you know, if men literally can't leave the nest of their parents, they become what's known as people that struggle to launch, you know? There's also technological aspects to talk about, you know, so whether it's the big nightmare rectangle or the small nightmare rectangle. From a young age, men's dopamine receptors are just getting fried routinely, leaving them unmotivated and, even worse, sedated. On top of that, you also have to take into account that we live in the postmodern era, meaning that the, let's say, unifying grand narratives that used to give us direction and purpose in life, we're now unshackled to. It means we're free to choose the direction that we take our lives in, or more free than we were back in the day, so to speak. The problem with this is that when given freedom, many men either feel resigned to or simply choose nothing. Men are dropping out of university, they're dropping out of the dating market, and according to social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, they're dropping out of the real world as a whole. Which I want to point out, I'm not blaming men for, you know, I've heard it said that like men are the only social group that are told fuck off, essentially. Like every other social group gets help for their plights, let's say, whereas men are the only group that are told that it's their fault, that they're down bad, so to speak. Which I don't think is a particularly fair take, especially when it comes from, you know, the contingent of people that say stuff like, the system oppresses all of us, and it's like, okay, so why don't you be sympathetic to everyone within the system then? But again, it's like, men, fuck off. It's your fault that you're suffering. It's your fault that the suicide rate is as high as it is.
If you are a man and you say, I am suffering today, what is the response that you're going to get?
Shut up.
So men are struggling right now, and the rest of the world says, no, you're not.
If the usual reasons that men typically historically would have to mature seem bleak or pessimistic, you can almost make the argument that it's rational to stay in this kind of delayed or prolonged state of adolescence, you know? It makes sense that you would remain being a Puer Aeturnus. It makes sense that you would remain being Peter Pan.
This is the Peter Pan story, roughly speaking. He's the boy that won't grow up, and he's magical. Well, that's because children are magical. They can be anything. They're nothing but potential. And Peter Pan doesn't want to give that up. Peter Pan looks at traumatized Hook and says, well, no, I'm not sacrificing my childhood for that. So that's fine, except he ends up king of the Lost Boys. In Neverland, well, Neverland doesn't exist, and who the hell wants to be king of the Lost Boys? And he also sacrifices the possibility that he'll have a real relationship with a woman, because that's Wendy. She wants to grow up and have kids and have a life. She accepts her mortality, she accepts her maturity. Peter Pan has to content himself with Tinkerbell. She doesn't even exist. She's like the fairy of porn.
From columnist Freya India, Gen Z are dating less, having less sex, settling for situationships that are empty and meaningless. And I think a major part of this is that human connection comes with a high level of risk. Among young men, for example, I'd say this risk aversion is most obvious in fear of rejection. A recent survey found that almost 45% of men aged 18 to 25 had never approached a woman in person. Another Puer survey found that half of single men between 18 and 30 are voluntarily single, which some suggest is in part because of fear. And then, following up that hood classic, beyond merely dating, we have something more expansive to talk about the modus operandi. How is man just like out here citing Latin and that? I'm fucking different. But anyway, author and psychologist Rob Henderson responded to that. People are slowly realizing they held the wrong mental model of young men. The wrong mental model says that young men are natural risk seekers and will naturally want to approach and possibly harass women. Now, people are learning that most young men's default factory setting is apathy and not giving a fuck. Most guys won't willingly take risks or approach women unless they are encouraged and incentivized in some way. The false mental model says young men are naturally predatory and must be disciplined into compliance. The real story is young men are naturally lazy and need a reason to do anything.
I think, in the modern age with technology, with video games, with porn, with scrolling phones, I've seen sort of research on what young men, like jobless young men, do. And most of the time they're scrolling their phones, playing computer games, watching porn, overeating junk food.
According to David Gilmour, the idea of manhood cross-culturally is not necessarily a threshold that men are guaranteed to hit. There's like a threshold, and some of them don't make it. You didn't make the cut. And so from the time of the hunter-gatherer right up until, recent times of, let's say, like pre-industrialization, men would go through rituals to become men, so to speak. But in modern times, we've essentially decided that that's somewhat archaic. And so now the only avenue, so to speak, through which men mature, or one of the avenues that men come to mature, is through the guidance of the Senex, alternatively known as the wise old man archetype. This is Jiraiya to Naruto, it's Master Roshi to Goku, it's Iroh to Zuko, it's Morpheus to Neo, it's Oogway to Kung Fu Panda. Bly and Hillman note that many men today out of the Puer Aeturnus, eternal youth archetype, which I said before. Continuing on though, which can benefit from being balanced by the archetype of the Senex, old man. But younger men now are often very hostile to older men. Again, the emphasis of now. This thing that's happening is socially constructed. And I'd imagine it's downstream of, let's say, the atomization of society, the lack of intergenerational links between people. The intergenerational ties are fucking cup up, bro. When's the last time you spoke to your granddad? Never. There's been a substantive increase in single parent households. Sometimes the dad isn't necessarily present, and even if the dad is present, sometimes emotionally speaking, he isn't still. So he's there, but he's not there. What did J. Cole say, bro? No role models, which isn't good, because if you are going to become a thing, you need to have good examples to guide you toward the thing that you're inevitably going to become. And the lack of that is terrible, precisely because
men are going to find someone. They need someone.
Right, that's the thing. And I say this often in this sort of conversation. In the fight between something and nothing, something is always going to win.
Enter the Manosphere. So the next thing that I'm about to share with you is probably going to be a little bit polarizing. You're either going to agree, disagree, or somewhere that's in the middle. I, for the moment, are not placing a value judgment on what I'm about to read, and so let me cook, bro. So, the Manosphere offers young men the pretense of something they aren't getting elsewhere. Advice, a community, a sense of purpose and significance. Using a mixture of self-help style philosophy, potted evolutionary psychology, and sexist tropes, Manosphere gurus don't really bother with a political program as much as they offer strategies for individual advancement. Lessons about personal responsibility, health, hard work, and confidence that would once have been imparted organically are instead being gleaned from misogynistic online father figures. In an ecosystem, if a food or energy source stops being available to an animal, they have to consume something else, and men are no different. If the usual avenues for men to cultivate their maturation, their manhood, their masculinity, if those usual avenues aren't available, then men will get it from somewhere else, and as it turns out, it's looking like a little bit like a bit of a travesty, boys. So, what is masculinity? Before we go on to talk about masculinity proper, we need to talk about the abnormality of masculinity, what's being dubbed in the modern day as toxic masculinity. And so, from the New York Times, I have a definition for you, baby boy. So what does toxic masculinity or traditional masculinity ideology mean? Researchers have defined it in part as a set of behaviors and beliefs that include the following: suppressing emotions or masking distress, maintaining an appearance of hardness, pause, I'm talking about an erection. Violence as an indicator of power, think tough guy behavior. In other words, toxic masculinity is what can come of teaching boys that they can't express emotion openly, that they have to be tough all the time, and that anything other than makes them feminine or weak. No, it doesn't mean that all men are inherently toxic. I agree with this definition for the most part, but there are some things that I have a bit of a grievance with. So this idea that toxic masculinity is synonymous with what was referred to as, what do they call it, traditional masculinity ideology. I feel like they add ideology on there to pathologize what would ordinarily be just considered male typical behavior, so to speak. Traditional masculinity is not necessarily the same as toxic masculinity, and just because you add ideology in there does not make it so. Do you know what I mean? This idea that of calling it, say, traditional masculinity ideology, I think runs the risk of what people sometimes think toxic masculinity already does, which is this kind of like too much of a catch-all term that's so broad that it can include almost anything. This is a critique that's already been put forward by Richard Reeves, the author of Mice, of Mice and Men, of Boys and Men, and this idea of toxic masculinity that's kind of too broad in some ways. That's even been put forward by feminist scholars as well, such as Carol Harrington and Mary Harrington. So, in contrast to toxic masculinity, there are a myriad of ways that masculinity in and of itself can be defined, characterized, let's say. And so, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be defining, characterizing masculinity as it pertains to archetypes, as it pertains to being in an embodied state. Like water, I would argue that masculinity is inherently good, but it starts to get a bit dangerous when you get to the extremes, let's say. For instance, if you find yourself in water that is considered to have an excess in thermal energy, that means that it's too hot and you will boil to death. Conversely, if you find yourself in water that has a deficit in thermal energy, that means that it's too cold and you will freeze to death. Luckily though, there's also a kind of Goldilocks of water, a water that we find to be just right, and actually that range can be quite expansive, you know? We don't have to make like postmodernists and redefine everything. Maybe we can just start appreciating masculinity in different forms, in different ranges. Baby boy. These ranges of masculinity that I'm talking about were initially conceptualized by Carl Jung, and then they were further developed by the book of the same name for the same 4 archetypes, those coming in: King, Warrior, Magician, and Lover. However, in the event that these traits are not embodied correctly, if something goes wrong, let's say, in their production, in their growth, let's say, then instead what you end up with is what is referred to as shadow masculinity. In their excesses, this comes in the form of the Tyrant, the Sadist, the Manipulator, and the Addict. Behaviors exhibited by those traits would probably fall under what is referred to as toxic masculinity. Conversely, when you have deficits of these masculine traits, so to speak, you end up with the Weakling, the Masochist, the Innocent, and the Impotent. If you do not strive for masculine traits, masculine behavior, embodied masculinity correctly, what you end up with is the shadow. And this is almost where the kind of personality test aspect of the video comes in, because as I said before, what you'll naturally find is the kind of masculinity that you naturally gravitate towards, whether you're a man or a woman, because we all have these traits lodged within us. It varies different to person, and so the thing that you're striving for will vary different to person, and your deficits will also vary person to person. I've found this particularly fairly psychologically enriching anyway. It's allowed me to understand people and myself as I look out into the world. You're striving for this, but you're falling into that or that. It's not a quadrant if it's a triangle. For videos like these, I tend to just try and take a back seat to what is being spoken about. However, if you want to see my particular masculinity matrix, there will be a video on Patreon. It will look like this. It will be more intimate. It will be more lo-fi. And so, you know, once you've reached the end of the video, if you've still got a hankering for late Honorhalls content, then you can swing over to the Patreon if you are a Patreon, or you can become one. So, for the remainder of the video, I am going to argue that, yes, the masculinity that the Manosphere propagates, so to speak, does indeed fall under the masculinity paradigm. The core question, though, is what kind of masculinity does it fall under? What of the 4 quadrants does it fall under? And if any, spoilers, there's going to be a lot, what of the shadow masculinity is being propagated by these clips, these edits, these podcasts? I'm going to be following the order of the book, so we're going to be starting with King and we're going to be ending with Lover, and in my humble opinion, Lover is the most important one because it gives a very illuminating answer as to why these Manosphere dudes particularly have such an obsession with having multiple women. And spoilers, it's not necessarily what you may think. And when I read it, I thought that was particularly interesting. It fucking, mate, it's a paradigm shift, bro.
Can I ask you one more question?
Fire away, honey.
Okay. If you have placed in only one place in your heart for one woman, or you want to have one woman in your heart, I think you said, why don't you just commit to one and choose to be faithful to her?
And so we've made it. With all the context in place, baby boy, we can now move on to the first of our quadrants, the King Archetype. You have an affinity for the king if in an RPG or D&D you play as the monk, cleric, or paladin. I just made that up, it's not necessarily the case. Or your favourite anime, which I'm also making up, is likely going to be One Piece or Naruto. Okay, so into the actual book now. Page 61. The King Archetype in its fullness possesses the qualities of order, of reasonable and rational patterning, of integration and integrity in the masculine archetype. It stabilizes chaotic emotion and out-of-control behaviors. It gives stability and centeredness. It brings calm. I think you see the attempt of rationalizing, stabilizing what is referred to as chaotic emotion coming from the Manosphere, say, but usually how they do it is in this kind of false dichotomy by saying women emotional, men logical.
We know women are emotional creatures. They're not logical creatures because men understand that women are emotional creatures. We understand that they cry. We understand that they're emotionally unstable.
And then you also see the notions of calmness, so to speak, emanate within the Manosphere too, almost to the point of parody, which is why you have like figures like Tate always wearing sunglasses, because then you get the additional veneer of being stoic. It's the same reason why rappers will wear sunglasses inside, because then you can't read them. Oh, so mysterious and in control. On top of that, you also have him doing the Uttara Modi hand gesture. That's what that's called, baby boy. It's supposed to be a thing that imbues the body with a sense of calm and control. This guy is doing it even when he's being fucking man's in fucking shackles, bro, and he's talking about, and he's doing a gesture as though he's still in control, because the hand gesture is supposed to be about fearlessness. It's supposed to be about enlightenment. Despite the fact that this idea of like calmness and stoicism is propagated by the Manosphere, there are countless examples of these guys losing their cool, getting, dare I say, emotional at things that they really even shouldn't be. You have this in the form of like Andrew Tate getting overwhelmed by talking to fucking Hassan Piker.
So let's change the subject because you've just proven your point.
Okay. Oh, he took his headphones off?
He gets very stressed sometimes, and you know.
Yeah.
You got fucking Myron about to pop a fucking vessel in the middle of his goddamn forehead.
You don't have some type of man that is willing to die to protect you? Bitch, it's your fucking fault. It's not ours. I'm tired of this shit. Why is everyone sitting here coddling women from their poor fucking decisions? If you want to be a fat hoe, fantastic. But don't expect me to sit here, bust my ass, become a self-made multi-fucking millionaire, get my clout, get my status up, and accept you, bitch. Fuck out of here.
Continuing with the king. This is the energy that expresses itself through a man when he takes the necessary financial and psychological steps to ensure that his wife and children prosper. This is the energy that encourages his wife when she decides she wants to go back to school to become a lawyer. This is the energy that expresses itself through a father when he takes time off from work to attend his son's piano recital. This is the voice of calm and reassurance, the encouraging word in a time of chaos and struggle. This is the energy that minimizes punishment and maximizes praise. It rewards and encourages creativity in us and in others. I think where they hit the mark, so to speak, within this criteria is when it comes to the financial aspect of it. You know, I don't think it's an accident that most of the Manosphere dudes also happen to be these kind of entrepreneurial work types. What isn't obvious to me, though, is whether that is for the benefit of their prospective future family, let's say. Because whilst they'll talk about women just want a provider in this kind of like faux evolutionary psychology language, so to speak, you'll also see them get infuriated with the idea of having to be a provider for a woman, leading them to make comments like this.
What we're saying is all women are fucking gold diggers. Some are just better at hiding the shovel. I genuinely believe, I honestly think all women are gold diggers. Some are just better at hiding the shovel. All girls are gold diggers, some are just better at hiding the shovel. All women are gold diggers, some are just better at hiding the shovel. Roll, it's Masi the go. Actually, I was the first one that said that.
The energy encourages his wife to go back to school to become a lawyer. Mate, a lot of these fucking Manosphere dudes, bro, don't even want their woman leaving the house, let alone going off for 6 years.
And of course, they don't go out. They're not allowed out. You stay in the house. You don't go nowhere. You're not, no restaurants, no clubs, nothing.
Not letting a woman out the house, that seems completely in line with the shadow of the king, which is known as the Tyrant. So, page 63, as in the case of all archetypes, the king displays an active, passive, bipolar shadow structure. We call the active pole of the shadow king the Tyrant and the passive pole the Weakling. The thing that the Tyrant is most known for is discouraging the people around him, and also even sometimes their children, should they have them. Continuing, page 64, his attacks may not be limited to verbal or psychological abuse, they may include physical abuse, spankings may turn to beats, and there may be sexual assaults as well. The father possessed by the Tyrant may sexually exploit his daughters or even his son's weaknesses and vulnerability.
Girls come to me and go, yeah, beat it up. I was like, oh yeah, okay, cool. No, I mean it. No, bitch, I mean it. I guarantee I changed the way you look at sex forever. You're gonna be fucking crying. I won't cry. I bet you cry, bitch. I bet you fucking cry. You're saying I wouldn't cry. You're challenging me to a fight. I don't even have to fuck you. Forget the sex part. That's a distraction. My dick can stay in my pants. I'll just start beating the shit out of you. How about that? We walk in the bedroom. I start kicking your ass. No sex. No sex involved. But you cry then.
People say, why did you live in Romania? And I explain my 5 reasons. One of them is the Me Too era. They go, oh, well, you're a racist. I say, no, I'm not a racist. But I like the idea of being able to just say, to do what I want. I like being free. I don't mention webcam until after I've had sex with the girl. You continue as normal, no mention of webcam. You f the girl. After you f the girl, you do the PhD test. So yeah, on corporatetape.com I have my PhD program, and that is, PhD is a pimp and hose degree that I'm,
Clever.
And that teaches basically how I got girls, how I met girls, how I got girls to like me, how I got girls to fall in love with me to work on webcam for me.
I have to fuck her so she obeys me. I don't give a shit about having sex with beautiful women. I fuck them so they listen to me, so I can get what I actually want, which is not them. It's a means to an end. Every single Bond girl was exploited. That's exactly what I do.
I suspect some of you may have found that difficult to watch, but at least it answers the question, why do people hate Andrew Tate? Because he's a fucking manipulative, physically abusive... Sorry, allegedly. Continuing, we can also observe the Tyrant King operating in certain ways of life, even in certain professions. The drug lords, the pimps... The mafia bosses are all examples. They exist to further their own status and what they think is their own well-being at the expense of others. I'm going to make your life worse whilst I make my life better at your expense.
So what I did is I unplugged their keyboards and plugged a new one in from me behind the screen. So the chicks would sit there and hit a keyboard that wasn't plugged in. And me and my brother, and eventually some staff I trained, would do all the talking. The girls were just pure, just famoosers, just laughing and doing this, their titties out. I had these guys selling their houses, life savings, loans, all of it to me. Give me it all. So like, and it's basic shit, right? You'd have a guy.
Feel bad or no?
Fuck no. To give a solitary fuck. Can we meet? I've sent you $200,000. Can we meet? Can we meet? Can we meet?
Is there anything about this man that does not rely on exploitation? Spoiler alert. No, the question was rhetorical. The Tyrant description also goes on to talk about the particular individual that is ensnared by the shadow, so to speak, them going on to develop narcissistic personality disorder. I'm gonna save the exploration of that kind of psychology to another video, so, you know, subscribe for that, hit the bell for that, baby boy. For now, though, I figured that I've spent enough time talking about Tate as the embodiment of the Tyrant archetype, and so now let us turn over to the other side of the shadow king, that is the Weakling, in which case we'll turn over to Justin Waller.
I don't want you to think I'm triggered by you, I'm not.
Okay. I'll go on to define the Weakling archetype in a second, but for now I want to contextualize it with this clip, where Justin is talking about why it's okay for him to have multiple families with multiple women, and then he's being pressed on it by Lila Rose.
I might have multiple family. Oh. You never know. I might like family more than you, so much I have 5.
Do you think that's a good thing to have multiple families?
I think it's good if there's one dad and there's not a bunch of step parents involved, and the dad can be the hero, and those 5 families live a 10x better life than they would have otherwise. Yes, ma'am, I do.
And you would want that for your daughters?
Yeah. I live my life unapologetically on my terms. So if my daughters that are overly spoiled and educated in every way and have friends all over the world and world traveled in the best schools in the world, if they have a problem with me at the end of the day, then they can kick rocks too.
Can I ask you one more question?
Fire away, honey.
Okay. If you have only one place in your heart for one woman, or you want to have one woman in your heart, I think you said, why don't you just commit to one and choose to be faithful to her?
I'm just not wired that way. I spent my whole 20s trying to fix myself. Thought something was wrong with me.
You're a man of self-control. You work out, you do business.
Yeah.
You can possess your own power and direct it the way you want to direct it. It's just not how I am. It's not how I am. You think that might be a limited mindset?
I think it's none of your business, but I don't want you to think I'm triggered by you. I'm not.
Okay.
And so, with that context in place, we have the Weakling. The man possessed by the Tyrant is very sensitive to criticism, and though putting on a threatening front, will at the slightest remark feel weak and deflated. He won't show you this, however. What you will see, unless you know what to look for, is rage, but under the rage is a sense of worthlessness, of vulnerability and weakness, for behind the Tyrant lies the other pole of the King's bipolar shadow system, the Weakling. If he can't be identified with the King energy, he feels he is nothing. The hidden presence of this passive pole explains the hunger for mirroring, for adore me, for worship me. So what you saw from that clip is Justin trying to embody the King archetype, so to speak, yet we find out pretty quickly that the depth of that is pretty fucking shallow. If you don't like how this king rules his kingdom, you can fuck off. If you don't like how this king rules his kingdom, you can kick rocks. How are you going to talk about your prospective future children like that? Mate, I provided for you, and so if you don't worship me, you can... For Justin, it's about the image. It's about being perceived as a hero. It's about having a harem of dependents so you can feel good about yourself, ooh-woo. And ironically, though we're not going to talk about it in this video, the hero is actually an archetype found within not man psychology, but boy psychology. So in many ways, this proclivity of wanting to be a hero, being perceived as a superhero even, is a sign of failed maturation, is a sign of underdeveloped masculinity. You're a little boy, bro.
No man wants a woman that he can't save from a castle and dragon. The day a man can no longer be a hero for a woman is the day that he'll probably check out.
I think you see the embodiment of the Weakling archetype pretty overtly. You know, you do not have to be Batman to do the detective work to spot this kind of thing. You see it when preemptively this geezer starts talking about, I'm not triggered. It's like, first of all, nobody asked, bro.
I don't want you to think I'm triggered by you. I'm not.
Okay.
Fun fact, if somebody tells you that they're not triggered randomly, then they are most definitely triggered. Nah, bro, man's not triggered, bro. Shut your fucking mouth, bro. It's okay, bro. You're a rational male, but also moving away from Justin, so we can talk about some of the concepts found in the Manosphere as a whole. If he can't be identified with King energy, he feels he is nothing. I think you find this in the rubric that the Manosphere, that the Red Pill propagates, you know, which is why they have such a insistence on men increasing what they refer to as their SMV, their sexual market value. It's essentially a shorthand matrix for how fuckable am I? It's comprised of looks, money, and status, and I think what's interesting about that is that all three of those things, the things that they consider to make them valuable, are all extrinsically motivated. It's all dependent on other people's perception. Do other people find me attractive? Has society told me that I'm valuable by accruing money? Do other people think I'm of high status? Not a single one of those is about, but how do I feel about myself? You know, it's putting other people's opinions about you above your own about you, which ironically, it's a little bit beta, you know. You're essentially outsourcing your self-esteem on these vanity metrics. And without those metrics, they essentially fall into the weakling. And I would argue that it's because they have what is referred to as a child wound, but that's outside the purview of this video, but it'll come up in a future one. A man like Plato, back in the day, ancient Greece, back in the day, same thing. He had a bar that, to paraphrase, was essentially that the people that most want power are often the least fit to hold it. And it's essentially because the people that are salivating at the idea of having power generally have these tyrannical aspects about them. And I think you see that a lot within Manosphere dudes, red pill dudes. That's why they're so obsessed with the submissive woman. Women to Manosphere dudes are essentially accessories, which is why they are made to feel like nothing and expected to tolerate everything.
If there's someone that's very, very young, might be really religious and like values marriage a lot, and goes into a marriage and has kids when they're like 18, 19, 20, and then a year into the relationship, it gets really, really abusive.
From
Would
who?
you? From both.
This is so rare.
Anyone
So
really.
rare.
I mean, it happens.
Go on.
My point is, I'm just, even though it might be rare from what you guys think,
it is.
If it would happen, what would you recommend for those people to do? Would they divorce, or do you want them to keep going in the relationship?
Keep going. You can't actually divorce. That's not a real thing.
Even though it might be like physically abusive.
You got to endure. People are too.
You want to stick in the relationship.
People are just. People nowadays are just pussies.
Moving on to the warrior. In an RPG, in D&D, you play as the barbarian, you play as the archer, you play as the fighter. Your favorite anime is Attack on Titan or Dragon Ball Z, and at various stages in your life you have tried to create a Kamehameha and failed, much to your dismay. So the warrior inherently is probably the most controversial archetype that we're going to be talking about. And I think it's what a lot of people think of when they think of the term masculinity. And its shadows are probably the thing that most people think of when they think of the term toxic masculinity. We live in a time when people are generally uncomfortable with the warrior form of masculine energy, and for some good reasons. Women especially are uncomfortable with it because they have often been the most direct victims of it in its shadow form. The book then goes on to talk about how even if you don't like the warrior type of masculinity, that it's not going to disappear. If anything, it will just kind of go underground and become worse. So until we get to that part of, the worse of the shadow, let's talk about the positive aspects of the warrior archetype. The warrior in its fullness. Page 81. A man accessing the warrior archetype has a positive mental attitude, as they say in sales training. This means that he has an unconquerable spirit, that he has great courage, that he is fearless, that he takes responsibility for his actions, and that he has self-discipline. Discipline means that he has the right to develop control and mastery over his mind and over his body, and that he has the capacity to withstand pain, both psychological and physical. He is willing to suffer to achieve when he wants to achieve. So immediately when I'm reading stuff like this, I'm thinking of people like, David Goggins, a lot of your other, let's say, entrepreneurial types, which I think the Manosphere has a lot of overlap with. To the warrior, their highest commitment is what the book refers to as their transpersonal commitment. It's the thing that kind of fires them up in the morning. It's their thing that Robert Greene would probably refer to as one's life task, the thing that you're most inspired, motivated to get up and do. This, however, comes with a bit of a risk, because their wives and girlfriends often feel alienated and rejected, competing hopelessly with the man's true love, his work. These are the people that will just work endlessly, because it's their thing. They're almost like singularly focused at one thing. I remember a few years ago watching a Jordan Peterson lecture online, and he talked about how there are certain kinds of men that are so conscientious that if you drop them in the middle of a forest and gave them an axe, all they would do is hack down trees, essentially. There are people that are just so, that is their thing. They need to work, and that is what is imbued within the warrior archetype. To give you a bit more of a flavour, some other adjectives associated with the warrior are things like them being aggressive, purposeful, mindful, decisive, disciplined, and efficient. In many ways, you can think of the warrior as almost like the most primal version of a man, let's say, the most primal and the least emotional, which is why they think about everything, including women often, as conquest.
Because as a man, I'm spending 99% of my energy finding a sexual partner.
The warrior, in his pure form, is emotionally detached. His transpersonal loyalty radically relativizes the importance of his human relationships. This is apparent in the warrior's attitude towards sex. Women, for the warrior, are not for relating to, for being intimate with, they are for fun. I think you see an example of this idea of like conquest and me getting mine and you not getting yours. There was a moment where Myron went on that date with Cheyenne where he mentioned about how like he doesn't give a fuck if his partner orgasms, because to him,
I don't want to sound like an asshole, but a woman's ejaculation is irrelevant. You only need one ejaculation to create life, and that's the man's. Now, with that said, does that mean I'm not gonna please my girl or whatever? Of course I will, but it's elective.
Definitely shit in bed.
Getting a nut off, that's for the boys. That's for the boys only. I want to bring your attention to this moment where the host mentioned about how sex is about having an energy exchange, and the way that Myron reacts is like...
Having sex is an intimate thing. It's an energy exchange.
Energy exchange... More typical female gibberish. Like, bro, energy exchange? What the hell? Bro, get out of here with that.
I'm going to elaborate on this within a future video, but I really think that the Manosphere, the red pill type dudes, they don't even actually like women. And I don't mean in a way that I'm accusing them of being homosexual. I said homosexual, bro. I'm not doing that card. Like, I've seen people do like TikToks about it of like, is Andrew Tate actually gay? It's like, mate, no, like, you're fucking stupid. But I do genuinely actually think that they don't actually like women. I don't think they enjoy spending their time with them, their company with them. They don't even like having conversations with them. These geezers, bro, they don't like women. I'm fucking telling you.
Like, shutting the fuck up is a huge skill set for a lot of modern day women, but they want to talk. Do it. Like, bro, we don't want to talk with y'all.
My opinion matters.
Yo, like,
let's communicate.
So one of the shadows to the warrior is known as the sadist. And the sadist takes their level of detachment to a whole other level. So, page 89, though detachment in itself is not necessarily bad, as we've said, it does leave the door open to the demon of cruelty. Further, along with his passion for destruction and cruelty goes a hatred of the weak, of the helpless and vulnerable, really the sadist's own hidden masochist. I think you see this sadistic side of the Manosphere played out in how their bread and butter, so to speak, their platform for discourse is what is essentially, as I've said before, a humiliation ritual. It's experienced, knowledgeable guy against these kind of like off-guard, OnlyFans women that are made to be representative of women as a whole, and then just dunking on them for like hours at a time, using women like they're these verbal punching bags, which is why the favorite thing to do, and one of the things that gets them some of the most views, is whoa, feminist gets kicked out of the blah blah. It's like, well done. This whole arena that you're in control of, you said you told them that they had to leave.
Well, I appreciate the truth, but you're being rude, so I'm gonna ask you to leave.
Okay.
So get up, get the fuck out.
Wow, don't you feel like a big strong man? Oh, look at you kicking someone out of the podcast studio. You're such a big man. Oh, dickhead. Now, you may be wondering what compels the sadist to be this way, and luckily, because like man's are intellectual and that, I've got the answer for you. The Shadow Warrior carries into adulthood the adolescent insecurity, violent emotionalism, and the desperation of the hero as he seeks to make a stand against the overwhelming power of the feminine, which always tends to evoke the masochistic or cowardly pole of the hero's dysfunctional shadow. The man under the influence of the Shadow Warrior bipolarity, unsure of his legitimate phallic power, is still battling against what he experiences as the inordinately powerful feminine and against anything supposedly soft and relational. To summarize, These geezers are essentially insecure about their own masculinity, about their own phallic power, and so as a result they're afraid of their own femininity, which is why they lash out at anything that is considered womanly, feminine, weak, emotional. You cannot show any emotion as a man. Any real man doesn't show emotion. Emotion is for women. I, as a man, subsist purely on oxygen and food. These are the people that develop into what Robert Greene refers to in The Laws of Human Nature. He refers to them as the tough guy, these hyper-masculine men, tough as nails in. I'm not... not beating the neurodivergent allegations with this one. Okay, he projects a rough masculinity that is intended to intimidate. Do not be fooled by such appearances. Such men have learned to conceal an underlying softness and emotional vulnerability from which within that terrifies them.
As Jung points out, and a lot of other psychologists, when you have a strong quality, let's say a man who's hyper masculine, who's so tough and rugged, you can bet that underneath it is an insecurity, is a feminine streak that he is afraid of revealing. You can bet that lurking underneath is a deep, deep insecurity of, I'm actually the opposite, I'm hiding the opposite. And the sense of being inauthentic, of repressing a part of ourself, is very painful.
As much as I like to poke fun at these hyper-masculine men, I will say that I do have a sense of sympathy for them, if I'm honest, because I know that developmentally the reason why they're like that is because at some point in a critical stage of childhood, they learned that it's not okay to share their feelings, it's not okay to share their vulnerabilities, because that just left them exploitable, which is ultimately what these kinds of men are running away from. They don't want to feel weak in the same ways that they were made to feel weak when they were younger. What they're running away from is the other polarity of the shadow warrior known as the masochist. Page 94. The masochist is the passive pole of the warrior's shadow, the pushover, the whipped puppy that lies just beneath the sadist's rageful displays. They don't want to feel powerless, which is why they go to the nth degree to feel powerful. This is why it's got to be over 6 figures minimum. Ideally, you're a millionaire, multimillionaire, maybe even a fucking billionaire. You've got more women than you have fingers. I would argue, though, and unfortunately, in the pursuit of them not wanting to feel weak, what they run the risk of is feeling nothing. Reject modernity, embrace masculinity. Do you know why I keep calm in every situation? Because my anger is stronger than me. You can't fool me, bucko. I know a trauma response when I see one, alright? Anyway, speaking of trauma responses, segue, I came across this Theo Von clip wherein he was interviewing a UFC fighter by the name of Sean Strickland. As you can imagine, this guy fights for a living, which by a certain kind of guy is considered to be the most masculine thing that you can do. Literally getting in the ring and beating the fuck out of someone. Over the course of this podcast, Sean opens up about a particular childhood trauma that he experienced that goes like this.
I was in probably 3rd, 4th grade, and fuck, man, I used to always sleep in my mom's room because I thought my dad was gonna kill my mom. So like I would like sleep by the door. I'd sleep
to make sure she was all right.
Yeah, I'd sleep under the bed. You know, I'd sleep by the door because I thought my dad was gonna kill my mom. So he starts strangling her, and I get out, and the only thing I could see is a guitar. I just fucking crack him in the head. Call the cops. I would always miss school because my dad would get home drunk, start drinking at like 6. He would get home at like 7. And like just be up until like 3 a.m, just like tell my mom, tell my mom she's a whore, he's gonna kill her. Like, dude, I remember like laying in bed. Like I remember I stopped believing in God, man. Like fucking, like I had fucking, yeah, it's crazy shit, dude. Crazy shit, man.
I'm sorry, buddy.
That's all good, dude.
We don't have to talk, man. I can just sit here with you for a minute.
It's one of the hard things that people don't understand, like trauma, you know?
Sometimes it just comes out.
I think we can all agree that that's pretty gosh darn harrowing. You know, when I watched it, I felt something. It wasn't pleasant. It's this kind of like, oh, you defenseless, poor thing. I wish you were not in that kind of situation. I wish you had gotten help, because evidently it still lives within you. As I've mentioned before, the childhood wound, The Inner Child, that podcast or a section of it was uploaded to a Twitter account called Fight Haven, and it had a caption that read, UFC middleweight champion Sean Strickland breaks down in tears on the Theo Von podcast. To which Tristan Tate, I wonder if you can guess who he's a brother of, he simply responded to this clip online by writing, "Gay. Very cool. You can literally fight people for a living. You can be champion of the world. But if you have PTSD, heaven forbid you talk about it on a podcast because this guy that's on fucking house arrest for allegedly sex trafficking might call you a fat." As much as the red pill, the Manosphere, likes to bring up the question of whose life is harder, which is only a trap so that they can, moral grandstand and say, well, actually, men's life are definitely harder than women's, which is why the rate is so high. The reason, or part of the reason, why the male rate is so high is because of stuff happening like this idea of like, well, if you're struggling, if you've got post-traumatic stress disorder, maybe you should just shut the fuck up and stop being a pussy. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. I wish I had let myself be happier. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. Those were some of the top 5 regrets that are reported by people on their deathbed, as recorded by Bronnie Ware, who used to be a palliative nurse. And so I'm just sharing that because my worry is that this Manosphere red pill discourse is essentially leading men to lives that they will eventually come to regret. To the fellas, and I guess the women watching too, should you need it, I, silly man with silly hair on the internet, I am giving you permission to give a fuck about your feelings because they're important, to care about the traumas that you have, to acknowledge the things that have happened to you so that you, not so you can be befallen to them, not so you can necessarily make excuses about them, but what's the expression that they say? You gotta feel it to heal it, So if you just numb out and try and do this alpha male stoic whatever, you man are talking about stoicism. You don't even know who Marcus Aurelius is, bro. And if you don't feel compelled to heal the traumas within you, to heal the emotional wounds within you, if you're not going to do it for your own emotional and mental health, at the very least, you can do it for your body.
And some people who have been successful a lot in their life never run into needing this for a long time. And when it happens, they're like shocked.
Yeah.
They're like, wait, I have emotions too?
It's crazy.
And traumas, like what you brought up in the past with your brother and your father, like traumas from our past, we call them very scientifically adverse childhood experiences. Different traumas can actually show up as physical ailments later in life.
Really?
Like I'll have patients come in with back pain, elbow pain, carpal tunnel symptoms, and it's happening as a result of mental health trauma they experienced as a child.
What?
Talk to your family, talk to a therapist, talk to your friends, and if you're worried about being called gay or being made to feel womanly, mate, if you need to, just kick it with a mandem, yeah, and do it around a round of Smash Brothers or something, just so long as you express it, bro. You need to.
Anyways, yeah, I don't know. I think it's something I'm still trying to process.
Yeah, but I don't think you should feel guilty for any of that.
Well, hey, whoa.
You little bitch.
How the hell are you doing that?
Ooh, you little bitch.
Oh, okay, yeah, Johnny, I got it.
Bitch. But you should remember, you've done a lot since then.
The Men's Sheds Initiative in Australia. Did you see that?
I had not seen this.
It was an initiative by the Australian government, I think, to try and improve men's mental health. They realized that getting men to sit down in a room and talk like this about their problems didn't work. So what they did is they built sheds that men came to, and then the men would bring like, I've got this knackered lawnmower and everyone needs to help fix it. So how are men talking? They're talking whilst their front brain is focused on this thing that's in front, and they are shoulder to shoulder, not face to face. And they're literally in a circle, and everyone's like, right, you've got the good drill and he's got the good spanner and I've got the hammer or whatever, and let's fix this thing. And God, dude, me and the missus were not getting on well, and before you know it, it's a therapy session mediated by this fucking lawnmower.
Now we have the Magician. People that are drawn to this archetype, I'm imagining in an RPG or D&D, you likely play as the wizard, a artificer, or a sorcerer, and I'd suspect that your favorite anime is Free Run or anything by Studio Ghibli. Pages 106 to 107. The Magician energy is the archetype of awareness and of insight, primarily, but also of knowledge of anything that is not immediately apparent or commonsensical. It is the archetype that governs what is called in psychology the observing ego. Its proper role is to stand back and observe, to scan the horizon, to monitor the data coming in from both the outside and the inside, and then out of its wisdom, its knowledge of power within and without, and its technical skill in channeling makes the necessary life decisions. What that essentially means to me is that the magician takes in a whole host of information, synthesizes it, and then uses that information to take the correct path or create something new, to create a new way of seeing. The way in which that this is embodied within the red pill space is literally within the idea of the red pill in and of itself. To be red pilled is to see the truth, so to speak. You know, it's these people that have like, we've taken in the relevant information, we've synthesized it, and now here it is for you to see the truth, so to speak. It's essentially, hey, we're going to enlighten you, which is, you know, a religious idea at best and a cult idea at worse. There's no such thing as like one group or one ideology or one mindset having a monopoly on what constitutes truth. Like, the moment you start thinking that way, you've lost, because then you don't have everything, all these other tools at your disposal. You're just like, oh, I just see everything in this one particular filter. As spoken about before, there is a pretty sizable, a pretty large contingent of men that are being swooped up by people that are literally cosplaying as the wise old man, literally cosplaying as Morpheus, whilst you are supposed to be assumed to be Neo, living through this fucking silly little video vicariously.
Remember, all I am offering is the truth, nothing more.
The qualities that the magician is supposed to exhibit is that he is intellectually curious and clear thinking. I think the audience of the red pill, of the Manosphere, I think they start out as being intellectually curious. You know, they're probably usually young men, lost men, or midlife crises men that need, you know, they've gotten to this point in life, they haven't got the golden key, so to speak, that unlocks everything, and then they get to the red pill and it's like all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I never thought like this before, you know? But, you know, by the time you get to podcast number 3, you've basically heard all that there is to hear, and this idea that, say, like, you can categorize everything as being either red pill or blue pill is a false dichotomy. It is a cognitive bias. I think you see that sometimes the red pill has magician archetype like characters within it, and I think at one point in time that used to be Sneeko, who used to make these very creative, precocious works of art, let's say. What I think the red pill, the Manosphere, has more of, however, isn't the magician, it's the shadow magician. It's the detached manipulator. The active pole of the shadow magician is, in a special sense, a power shadow. A man under this shadow doesn't guide others as a magician does. He directs them in a way they cannot see. His interest is not in initiating by graduated degrees that they can integrate and handle into better, happier, and more fulfilled lives. Rather, the manipulator maneuvers people by withholding from them information they may need for their own well-being. He charges heavily for the little information he does give, which is usually just enough to demonstrate his superiority and his great learning. The shadow magician is not only detached, he is also cruel. I want to preface what I'm about to say next by saying I'm not anti-entrepreneur, say, or anti-people that make a fuck ton of money. I'm trying to be one of them. But I do think it's interesting that a lot of these Manosphere dudes, these gurus, a lot of the way that many of them make money is by selling courses on how to be a man.
For example, inside of my masculinity blueprint, MBT process, my program, my mentorship for men.
And then in regard to being a manipulator outright, these people will literally just tell you, point blank,
don't be afraid of manipulation because someone's going to do it. I used sex as a tool to make women love me so they'd obey me and live in my house and make me money. That's what I wanted. So I used to pay my girls 30%. So for every $10,000 they made, I give them 3, and I keep 7. They thought they were on 50%. And I said that the disparity is because of taxes. So you're on 50%, we get to pay the tax first, and then it's 50-50. So really you're paying 30, you tell them you're paying 50, the difference is in the tax. Every single Bond girl was exploited. That's exactly what I do.
As I've mentioned before, a lot of the Manosphere dudes, a lot of the Manosphere discourse will confuse what I refer to as playing the love game and instead playing the power game. The love game looks like this, the power game looks like this, which is how they come to these reductive ideas about relationships, how they get to these transactional ideas about relationships and wind up saying things like,
men and women, we're very different. We have opposing goals. Like, girls are trying to, get resources, time, attention out of guys. Guys are trying to get sex.
Here's how it should work. I'm a man, I give a girl my attention, and she gives me sex. So I give my attention to get sex, she gives her sex to get attention.
It's such a transactional, video gamified idea of people and relationships, you know? It's like, if I give Adelaide my gold ingot, maybe she'll reward me by giving me some of her pussy of divine enchantment. On the manipulator front, as I've spoken about before, like attracts like, and whether you think about it in the woo-woo sense or you think about it in the evolutionary psychology sense, so this idea of associative mating. And so if you're a detached manipulator type, you're probably going to be attracting detached manipulator types. If you, for instance, think that we live in a world that is, quote, a pimp or be pimped world.
Here's the thing. In this world, it's either pimp or be pimped.
Then you're going to attract situations that confirm that to be true. If you are high in dark triad traits, i.e. psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism, you're also going to attract people that are high in those traits. So, this is not from the book that we're reading, but it's from a different study. We showed that women high on all dark triad traits were attracted to males with high narcissism levels. Women with high levels of Machiavellianism, narcissism, or psychopathy that were oriented to long-term mating were more attracted to males high on narcissism. Like attracts like. If you're dark triad, you will also attract other people that are dark triad. Birds of a feather flock together, is that it? That's a bar if true. Birds of a feather flock together. For context, dark triad personality traits are overwhelmingly the minority of the population, generally speaking. So my theory is that because a lot of these Manosphere dudes, these red pill dudes, are very Machiavellian, often psychopathic at times, they naturally attract and or are attracted to women that are also dark triad. And then from there, it's almost as if they take the sample size of women that they are interacting with and generalize all women to be like that, even though they're probably like 5 to 10% of the population. And then they go out and tell guys, all women are like this, all women are like that. And it's like, no, just the one that you're interacting with. Interestingly, despite the fact that Manosphere dudes will naturally be attractive to women that are high in dark triad traits, they claim that they're more attracted to women that are young.
There's a reason why they call the store Forever 21 and not Forever 41.
And usually the reason that they give for being attracted to young women is this evolutionary psychology reason, evolutionary biology reason even. They go on to talk about fertility and reproduction, but one of the very much under-discussed things that I think lies underneath this is that it's not necessarily that they're attracted to younger women because of things like reproduction and fertility, as they claim. Moreover, I think the reason that they're attracted to young women is because, and this has been statistically documented, younger women are easier to deceive.
Narcissists can fool naive women. That's why narcissists propagate, by the way. And we know this because narcissistic psychopaths, young women are more likely to fall for narcissistic psychopaths. And the reason for that is they can't tell them from competent men, because narcissistic psychopaths imitate competence, and that's their niche. And so they have a confidence that isn't justified by their ability. But the women check out the confidence as a marker of ability, and the falsely confident can fool them, especially if they're young and naive.
We are at what I believe to be the most important archetype in relation to discussions of the Manosphere and things of that nature. We're going to be talking about the Lover Archetype, and this is going to illuminate why Manosphere dudes are fascinated with the idea of having a pantheon of women, as well as why it's okay for them to cheat and why they even encourage it. And we'll also talk about the hows and whys that they view women also.
If he did cheat, he's a damn good man from hiding it from all of you.
So we have one more section to go. However, I just want to make a quick intermission to thank the patrons for holding it down for the Mandem and Dat. As I mentioned in the beginning, I will be giving an assessment of my own masculinity in relation to these archetypes and things, and so you can see that at the end of this video. You'll be able to find it in the pinned comment down below. Even if you personally didn't necessarily agree with everything that I said or shared within this video, I would suspect that given that you're still here, that you, in some manner at least, enjoyed the video. So if you can drop a like for the kid, that would be poggers with me. Subscribe to see similar videos, hit the bell if you haven't already, and now let us press on to talking about the Lover Archetype and its shadows. To give a flavour, if you gravitate towards the Lover archetype, I suspect in an RPG and D&D, you got the gist by now. You probably play as a druid, a healer, a rogue, or a bard, and your favourite anime is Violet Evergarden, or anything by Makoto Shinkai. Violet Evergarden does. The Lover is the archetype of play and of display, of healthy embodiment of being in the world of sensuous pleasures and in one's own body without shame. Thus, the Lover is deeply sensual, sensually aware and sensitive to the physical world in all its splendour. Keynote, the Lover, is not necessarily just about in relation to women. It is primarily, and we'll get onto that, but it's not just about that. It's about how one is in the world. Along with sensitivity to all inner and outer things comes passion. The Lover's connectedness is not primarily intellectual, it is through feeling. Now, you might be hearing this, and depending on how entrenched you are in like Red Pill and Manosphere ideology, you might be like, what? You can have feelings and still be considered masculine? Wow. Nobody's ever thought about that before. You don't have to be a Sigma grindset. You can feel things, bro. It's okay to feel. Look into my eyes. Look into my eyes. It is okay to feel. You can be enchanted by the splendour of life and still be considered masculine. And this completely flies in the face of a lot of the discourse that is spoken about today. This idea, that says that women are the feelers and men just have to be rational and stoic at all times. Reading about the Lover archetype also, it highlighted to me why there is such a huge skew within ideas of masculinity, because the Lover archetype, I would hazard a guess as to say that this is the one that's least represented both in the Manosphere and then this gradually heaping pile of men that are increasingly being considered invisible, like I spoke about in the dating app video. It's almost as if you have like a whole section of a skill tree to video gamify it for you gamers. It's as though one of your core skill trees is completely locked off, which is why your masculinity is imbalanced. It's why you need to listen to Sigma grindset compilations to fall asleep. The Lover is one with others. It feels other people's emotions. The Lover is emotive, idealist, spiritual, intuitive, and sensual. Despite the fact that the Lover archetype is a part of masculinity, you may remember the clip I showed you beforehand.
Have you ever been in love?
To a woman? Female vaginas are disgusting. I've had love for women, but I don't think...
Really?
Yeah, I don't think it's in a man's best interest to be in love with a woman.
This can only be a conclusion that is reached because one is not adequately, correctly channeling the Lover archetype, because what is instead being channeled is the shadow of the Lover. In this case, it is the addicted lover. The most forceful and urgent question a man identified with the addicted lover asks is, why should I put any limits on my sensual and sexual experience of this vast world, a world that holds unending pleasures for me? That sounds like the monologue of an anime villain, Why should I limit myself? This world is mine for the taking. Enter polyamory, or polygamy specifically, because heaven forbid women play by the same rules. No, it's men get the harem of women, women get a fraction of a guy. Sorry, ladies, I don't make the rules. I just observe them and relay them and then tell you why they're fucking stupid. Of course, having multiple sexual partners is for the fellas, and if you don't like it, I'll just accuse you of haram.
But that doesn't mean it's not haram and against the will of God.
Before we move on, I should explicitly point out that the addicted lover isn't necessarily in relation to women in relation to relationships. It's in relation to the world in general. These are the people that are never satisfied. These are the people that constantly more. These are the people, say, that own over 30 fucking cars because they weren't satisfied after they got to the third one.
Trust me, from the man who has 52 cars.
Okay, so polyamory. We'll start out by talking about monogamy first, and then the text will do it for me. It will transition into talking about polyamory. So, Monogamy, though not in a simple way, can be seen as the product of a man's own deep rootedness and centeredness. He is bounded not by external rules but by his own inner structures, his own sense of his masculine well-being and calm, and his own inner joy. But the man moving from one woman to another, compulsively searching for what he knows not what, is a man whose inner structures have not yet solidified. Because he himself is fragmented within and not centered, he is pushed and pulled around by the illusory wholeness he thinks is out there in the world of feminine forms and sensual experiences. Essentially, to be monogamous is almost to voluntarily subject oneself to deprivation, but that deprivation allows the more holistic blossoming of life to occur. You get more of a full, enriching life, as one of the Harvard studies that I cited in a previous video said. One of the most important things to people is their relationships, is monogamous relationships. It's having a partner, it's having a lover, it's having a companion. Those that are more swayed towards polyamory to polygyny, however, are more chaotic internally. They are foregoing the option of having a stable relationship, of potentially that blooming into a family and all the, the richness of life, and instead aiming for hedonistic pleasures. It is vice turned virtue, and that is why Tate will relentlessly make the same joke about how...
I'm telling you, a man can be head over heels in love. A man can be head over heels in love with you. I can be ready to die for you, take a bullet for you. Ready to take a bullet for you?
I can be head over heels in love with a woman, ready to die for her, ready to take a bullet for her, protect her, give her all the money in the world, make sure she has a beautiful family, a nice big house, all of it.
But I'll still fuck that bitch.
Let us turn over to Justin Waller once again, the man that braggadociously says things like...
If you lined up every man on the planet and you took them and you put them in a room and you said, hey, listen, nobody's in here, it's just us. You can hit this button and you can love your wife, be an amazing father, sleep with as many hoes as you want, and then go home and hold your wife or have sex with your wife and hold her at night. All you have to do is hit this button and everybody will be cool with that. Every man would look left, he'd look right, make sure nobody's in the room, and he'd hit the fucking button.
Now, for those that were paying attention, Justin just invoked the fallacy of ad populum, which is to say that, well, if the majority of people would do it or are doing it, that must mean that that's correct. Young Justin, the type of guy to be asked, if everybody was jumping off a bridge, would you do it? And he's like, well, if everybody else is doing it, I guess. Can I do a southern accent? Well, if everybody else is doing it, I get... No, that's not good. That's not good. Pressing on swiftly, the confidence that he shows about this seemingly gets worn down pretty gosh darn quickly, because with a sprinkle of self-awareness, before he gets triggered, he does willingly admit to himself and other people that
it's not how I am.
If you have only one place in your heart for one woman, or you want to have one woman in your heart, I think you said, why don't you just commit to one and choose to be faithful to her?
I'm just not wired that way. I spent my whole 20s trying to fix myself. Thought something was wrong with me. You're a man of self-control. You work out, you do business. Yeah. You can possess your own power and direct it the way you want to direct it.
Pay attention to the phrasing in particular. Try to fix myself. So either I'm being pedantic or that's a Freudian slip. That is an admittance that something psychosexually, something went wrong with this geezer, bro. And whilst I would like to speculate, I don't need to, because the book that has the answers, the holy book has the answers. Page 136. What the addict is seeking, though he doesn't know it, is the ultimate and continuous orgasm, the ultimate and continuous high. This is why he rides from village to village and from adventure to adventure. This is why he goes from one woman to another. As I mentioned before, a lot of the Manosphere dudes are explicitly stuck within the warrior archetype only, which is why they see women as these disposable avenues through which to get high from. As such, they have concluded that it is more important to them to have these kind of shallow, vapid entry points that allow them to have status-affirming sex as opposed to building a relationship that actually has depth, because heaven forbid, what if it explodes and I put all my eggs in this basket? Then I'll be left with nothing. What they do as a form of risk management, so to speak, is to have a bunch of shallow avenues to pursue pleasure and joy as opposed to putting it into one thing and experiencing the richness of love. I'll substantiate the psychology behind this next thing that I'm about to say in a future video, but suffice it to say, a lot of the Manosphere dudes have what is referred to as a insecure attachment style, and that psychological concept perfectly fits within the parameters of the addicted lover. Perfectly. People with insecure attachment styles often experience more relationship anxiety and consider the pain from breakups to be borderline unbearable. Addicts, more generally, will oftentimes feel withdrawals from their substance of choice. However, Manosphere dudes, red pill dudes, their substance of choice that they have previously felt withdrawals from is love. And so they concluded that that was so painful that never again will I feel the pain that I once did. I will become tough as nails. I will not invest in these hoes. They're all the same. It's like, no, you're just traumatized. And I'm sorry that that's the case.
Some people experience heartbreak with such an ache, with such a sense of longing and such a sense of fracturing on the inside that their longing becomes obsessive, that they are trapped in rumination, and that it experienced like a withdrawal. That is not all breakups, but that is the extreme kind of breakup, which has been compared to an addiction because of the intense sense of withdrawal and because it takes place in the same centers in the brain.
In pursuit of filling the void, the addicted lover continues. Each time his woman confronts him with her mortality, her finitude, her weakness and limitations, hence shattering his dream of this time finding the orgasm without end. In other words, when the excitement of the illusion of perfect union with her, with the world, with God becomes tarnished, he saddles his horse and rides out looking for renewal of his ecstasy. I want to point out, I think that this perfectly captures why the red pill is so fascinated with the idea of the wall. The wall being, for those of you that don't currently know, this idea that like a woman's value peaks at 23 and once she hits like 30, or for some people even 28, that she's like fundamentally done. Her mortality and finitude ruins the excitement of the illusion of the perfect union. I don't want to be reminded that she is immortal. We will live on forever in perfect ecstasy and bliss. Red pill men use women as a vessel, as a harbinger for their self-esteem. So the idea is such that because to them, younger women have higher value, so you know, the ones that are around 23 or so, to them they're the 8s, 9s, 10s of the world. And so the idea is, if they can get their SMV up in order to attract women of that caliber, then that must mean that they're high value as well. You know, if they can attract 8, 9s and 10s, that must mean that they're also an 8, 9 or a 10. That means that they're high value. They're literally outsourcing their self-esteem based on if they can convince a 23-year-old to sleep with them. They love the women that will reflect back to them this idea of high self-esteem, and they become incredibly resentful of the ones that don't.
So now that I'm up, you're down, fuck that shit, I'm gonna exercise the leverage. You wanna be with a guy like me? You need to be at your fucking prime.
What makes for the perfect union for them is shallow box ticking. Did I get the validation that I was seeking? Yes. Perfect. If I don't get that validation from a woman, or even better, in which case she's fulfilled her purpose, and so now that that's done, you can fuck off.
Well, the other thing too that women should know is that if a man sleeps with you and he doesn't respect you, the moment he's finished with you, he will have nothing but contempt for you. And girls are often brokenhearted, let's say, because they've slept with some guy and then he doesn't call them. It's like, I can tell you that guy finished in bed, the first thing he wanted to do was get the hell out of there as fast as possible, because it's sexual satiation and immediate disgust, contempt, and shame. Immediate. They don't want real relationships. They don't even want real women, because to them it's all about the fantasy. To them it's all about the idealization. Men, under the fragmenting energy of the addict, will often amass huge collections of photographs of nude women and then arrange them in categories like breasts, legs, and so on. They marvel at the beauty of the parts, but they can't experience a woman as a whole being, physically or psychologically, and certainly not as a unity of body and soul, a complete person with whom they could have an intimate human relationship. What you need to remember is that, unlike me, this book came out
in 1992, meaning that some of the vernacular is probably a little bit off. Men aren't running around with photographs, but they are running around with pornified versions of women, you know? Breasts and legs, that's kind of giving boomer. What it essentially means is this kind of like pornified way of seeing women. Not seeing a woman as a woman, but seeing them as an object to derive pleasure from, and that is about it. May I remind you of the energy exchange clip?
Energy exchange? What the hell?
Why are women always talking about things like energy exchange? Manosphere dudes, red pill dudes, warrior dudes, so to speak, do not have the skill tree to access the lover archetype. They cannot feel. It is merely about conquest. An energy exchange would require both parties involved with the boinking to be mutually considered to be sentient.
Female are barely sentient.
Which they don't tend to like. They don't want a sentient being. This is why they are so fetishistic about the idea of the submissive woman.
We tell them, listen, you're single because you're rude, you're obnoxious, and you're bitchy, and dudes don't want that. Men want submissive women.
So that's one way that Manosphere dudes will idealize women. Essentially, people for whom you use their body to masturbate with and increase your self-esteem in doing so. A rather negative idealization, shall we say. However, there's a debatably positive version of that idealization that comes in the form of idol worship, so to speak. And we see this in things like when Tate says that
I have nothing against women. I believe women are the most precious things on the planet. Women are very talented, beautiful creatures.
Women are the most beautiful creatures in the world. Does that apply to all of them, Andy Tate? You already know the answer to that one, Chief.
You know, me personally, right? So I won't date a girl who's older than 25. And that's not even about... Bro, what's going to happen is when people see this, there's always going to be some old hoe going. When I say old, I mean like 28.
Women are the most beautiful creatures in the world, as long as they don't age and they require my provision. Am I right? Given the way that Tate pedestalizes women, Jung might say that Tate has what is referred to as an anima problem. He doesn't like women per se, he likes women in his imagined reality, and ideally that's within the women that he's interacting with, embodying the archetype of, say, the damsel or the princess. Which is why you often see this dichotomy playing out in like red pill spaces, manosphere spaces. Either she's a hoe, she's a 304, or she's this perfect virginal being, this feminine, submissive woman. There is no in between. She's either a thought. It's essentially this meme played out, but in real life.
All women are queens. If she breathes, she's a god!
You may be watching this thinking, well, it doesn't matter what they think of the women in actuality because fundamentally they're still having relationships with them. And my point would be that they're not actually having relationships with these women. They're having relationships with their own fantasy. They're having relationships with their own imagined projection.
If you put the woman that you're attracted to on a pedestal, what you're really attracted to is your unconscious idealization of women. That's a projection, psychoanalytically speaking. And then they confuse the woman with that idealization, which is very difficult to bear for the woman because she's not really there. That's the first problem. Plus, the guy won't be able to listen to her or appreciate anything about her that's not perfect or in accordance with that ideal.
The opposite shadow of the addicted lover is the impotent lover. And I would say that this is almost entirely what the red pill manosphere is running away from, is trying to accrue evidence for the opposite. The impotent lover is characterized by a lack of aliveness, enthusiasm. They find themselves bored often. They have a flattened affect, i.e. they're emotionless. In a nutshell, they're essentially depressed and, as the name suggests, oftentimes literally impotent. But it isn't just the lack of vision that signifies the oppressive power of the impotent lover in a man's life. It is also the absence of an erect and eager penis. This man's sex life has gone stale. He is sexually inactive. I don't think that the leaders of the so-called red pill fall under this, but I do think a lot of the viewers, the listeners of it, fall into that, which is why by watching red pill manosphere podcasts and what have you, it's almost like they're getting to be a part of the opposite of the impotent lover. It's like, oh, look at all these men with the abundance of women that they have exposure to. It's a power fantasy, fundamentally. Impotent lovers, incel types will watch Manosphere podcasts, scrawny nerds will play God of War. It's a power fantasy. It's the same thing. I'm so afraid of the idea of the impotent lover that to completely give myself evidence to the contrary, I will have a voracious appetite. It won't be that one woman will be enough for me. I need 20! I need... As I mentioned earlier, one of the ways that you can imagine masculinity is almost as though it's an ecosystem. And so, because there's this proclivity that, let's say, many men don't have access to the lover, so to speak, because for many people, the first masculine traits that they may have developed, they may have conjured up, would have been lover archetypes. But because we live in a society, it's being so strangled, people aren't really being able to be in their lover energy, their lover archetype, so to speak. Whether that's because of gender animosity, whether that's perceived or actually real, or because of how fucked dating apps have made romantic relations. So there's this image that I came across, and it's essentially a skeleton pulling another skeleton into another dimension. And you can tell that the skeletons are sexed because, first of all, the colours around them, but second of all, because titties. What this image represents to me is that men, without women or the cultivation of the lover archetype properly, they essentially live in this colourless, emotionless world. And for the record, I do think that men can traverse into the world of colour, into the world of emotion. They can do that by themselves, I think. However, I do think there's a certain kind of man, particularly those that are stuck in the warrior archetype, say, that either cannot do it themselves or refuses to do it themselves. And worse yet, they will see their lack of feeling, their lack of emotion as a virtue when indeed it's actually a vice. Living in this binary black and white world. And as we went over, it's the lack of emotion, the lack of expression, the lack of being true to oneself that is one of the biggest regrets of the dying of those that are on their deathbed. So, to the men watching, whether it is through the cultivation of the various archetypes that we've spoken about, or specifically the lover archetype, whether that's you pulling yourself through to that realm, or somebody pulling you through to the realm, I hope to see you in the world of the colour. And to the women that are having relations with colourless men, I will call them, I wish you patience and courage. If the ecosystem of masculinity wasn't fucked in the ways that it is, and these fucking podcasts were not promoting a bent, twisted version of masculinity, shadow masculinity, it is likely that the men in your life likely would have developed into the kind of men that you would have wished for them, and that they would have wished for themselves.